Da 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 da. It's the motherfucking day of the.
Okay, we start off on a good note tonight to get myself pumped up because it's been a long, long day here in Moscow. A lot of snow. The snow is still coming down. It's not as bad, of course, out in Western Siberia where Mr. Flint is. However, it's still not great. Listen, tonight's show we have a cracker for you. I have three brilliant co-hosts with me this evening. We're going to start off with the Super Bowl last week, of course, an absolute barnstormer, cracker of a finish as I heard on Sunday morning, on Monday morning from some people stateside saying that they were disappointed because they said it ended like a soccer match with a penalty kick. So there you go. That's what they felt. What else we have got? Of course, the Manchester United saga has come back and boiled up again. Not just one, not just two. There are now three bidders to take over the theatre of screams in Old Trafford, and we're going to speak with that as well, because one of the people we, of course, had dug into in every sense last summer was myself, Cian and Isolt on the show. And yeah, we're going to repeat that again and have a bit of a deeper dig, because of course there is an American bidder and also a Qatari bidder as well, with lots of racism on show of that as well. What else have we got? Of course, we're going to have a chat about boxing, because of course the last, as Isolt mentioned just before we come on air, the last of the Matchroom World Champions, British World Champions, is gone, and what comes next there, and of course the costs surrounding boxing, and of course what happens when a social media leak destroys someone's career and their family, and then it follows up. So twice in a week, one rugby league player has lost his wife, lost his kids, lost his career, and lost all credibility. We're going to come into that a little bit later on as well, to see about the effects of media on athletes. And of course, we're going to speak about Tiger and his tampon, and a silly joke that actually wasn't that bad of a joke, but did not go down very well at all. So I'm going to welcome straight into the show my co-hosts, Andrew Flint, Isolt Cody, and Paul Hook. Going to start off straight away. Isolt, you raced back up to Dublin today, or are you still down in Tipperary?
I know I've made it back to Dublin. Being in Tipperary is always an experience. Very happy to be back in the capital. It feels a lot safer than the wilds of Tipperary, where Brian once again came across a sulky. He's convinced that all they do in my hometown is race. They're the Paul, Andrew, for your benefit, they're the traveling community. They race horses with like a little mini carriage behind them.
It's like harness racing.
Yeah.
Harness racing, but they do it on the roads and they close down traffic. And
my hometown is a big area for it.
Yeah, it's absolutely lawless. And it's funny because I remember when I was out, this is like over 30 years ago, I was out for a bike ride. I was actually, I'd hurt my knee, actually playing football, and I was told then I couldn't go road running for boxing. I said, look, go riding a bicycle. And I did it. Yeah. And I was nearly creamed, not one, not two, but three sulkies going flying past me. They were racing on the roads. And then
judging by the video at the beginning of the show, Alan, why on earth were you riding a bike down a road in Ireland? I mean, really, come on.
I know, fair enough. We're going to go. Okay, Andrew, I'm going to come back to you because I've something to throw your way as well in just a moment. But Paul, starting off straight with you. Cracker of a Super Bowl, everything we expected. You did the right thing. You backed the other team, and the Eagles, of course, fell. Like last year, we did the same on air as well. So you got that one right. All of our guys got it right as well. You must have had a happy early Monday morning.
Yeah, it was a fantastic Monday morning. Firstly, it was absolutely cracking game of American football. Staying up till 3 o'clock in the morning. My time for it was well worth it. I think there's a lot of neutrals who just enjoyed a really fantastic game of American football. Kind of the Chiefs coming from behind as they have done a few times this season, and Mahomes showing why he's probably the best player in the NFL.
Well, what made the difference between the two teams? Because it was only a kick of a ball between them. Yeah,
I think in the second half, the Eagles were just out-coached. I think Andy Reid had a fantastic game plan. The touchdowns to Kadarius Toney and to Sky Moore were taking advantage of kind of the Eagles, like a frailty they have kind of passing off defensive situations between the safety and kind of the corners, and the Chiefs exploited twice in the matter of a couple of minutes. And just Mahomes gritted it out. He kind of re-injured his leg, but kind of he ran for 26 yards. I think that was the longest quarterback run in the Super Bowl history. So I think he was just out-coached and out-quarterbacked.
There were a couple of instances in the game because I watched it and it was difficult. Myself and Andrew mentioned we both watched it at the same time, and it was difficult at times to keep going because of the hour, the time difference. One thing I noticed with the play and with all around, I mean, Rihanna, I thought, I woke up at the end of it, and actually I woke up to start and then kind of went off my tea because it was very, very, nondescript. Overall, I thought the razzmatazz surrounding the Super Bowl was less this year than before, or maybe I was misreading that, Paul.
I think this year, because of the two quarterbacks that were in the Super Bowl, kind of the football kind of led the way. Obviously, Rihanna was fantastic, and it was a really, it's not my cup of tea, but watching it was a big spectacle. But I think just the kind of the stories around the Super Bowl, kind of the Kelsey brothers, Andy Reid, Mahomes, and Jalen Hurts. I think just the football for the Super Bowl anyway kind of just took precedence, as it were, rather than kind of the show itself.
But we're going to bring the other guys in a moment. When we're talking about American football, of course, we had the Hamlin, of course, the Mar Hamlin incident, shall we say, rather than injury, because it was an injury, but it was more of an incident around it, which did seem, when I saw it seemed to be straight away because of a contact injury. It was like that's what it seemed to be. Are you ever nervous because, of course, you're coaching, you're involved in American football in the UK, and there are no prisoners taken. I've seen some of the play in the top, all the way down in the down to the second tier or third tier. Are you never worried about serious things like that as well? Like, I mean, how do you stand on that?
Yeah, kind of every time you step on the field, kind of as a player or kind of watching from the sidelines as a coach, you just have to trust that you've coached your players well enough that they understand at all times kind of the right techniques. I play defensive line, so I appreciate I'm going to be run into by defensive linemen. They're going to be 300 pounds, and they're going to be wanting to hit the guy behind me. And I just have to make sure that my technique and the technique that I've taught to others is correct, and so that nobody kind of gets injured. If you kind of play the game, not half-hearted, but kind of if you're unsure or you're just reacting rather than taking the lead in situations, then there's more chance, I feel, of you kind of being injured. If you kind of, there's always an old saying, be the hammer, not the nail. And I think if you are acting as the hammer and kind of you are the one that is projecting, I don't want to say the violence, but projecting the strength and your will, then you will be less likely to be injured, I personally believe.
There is a thing when I grew up playing hurling, and Lisa would know this, go from hurling country. It's either you go in or stay out. You don't go half-hearted in, because, of course, in hurling, of course, they're swinging a stick. And I always coached it to youngsters and adults as well. Youngsters, I always compare it, as was compared to me by, I think it was my granddad said to me, I remember it from my granddad, said, the kick of a horse. He said, if you're beside the horse, the hind legs of a horse, and it kicks, it'll push you away. But if you're standing away from the horse, too far away, the law of physics means that there'll be more force and impact. There was one moment which I kind of went, oof. And what I didn't like, Paul, this was a hit. And it wasn't a blindside hit, it was just a hit on a defender by the Eagles, which kind of, the reaction to it made me kind of wince and think it was kind of glorification of the info. And I'll just play them now. It's Jason Kelce. You just see it. You just see what happens now. And it looks horrible in slow motion. It was bad in real time. But just listen to the reaction of the commentators.
Hey. 2nd and 11. Over the middle and low throw, and it's incomplete. Try to get it to Goddard. Man, heard that hit all the way up here.
Wow, Trent McDuffie, the defensive back, he's on the wrong side of this hit. Big Jason Kelce just comes and lays the wood.
Comes and lays the wood. You know, it was kind of, now, at the moment when I saw that, I was like, oh, you know, it was like, ooh. And then when I looked at it again in the slow-mo, I kind of went, oh, that is not good. That doesn't look good. Paul, in that though, how often does that happen in American football in an average match? How often does something that makes the whole sideline go, oh my God, how often does that happen?
Yeah, it happens a lot. I mean, in that instance, kind of Jason Kelce is trying to clear out McDuffie. He doesn't, you know, you got to remember he's a 300-pound man, kind of running at speed, speed at which I could hit up to, and you know he can't suddenly stop on a dime, as they say. He can't kind of alter his path. He doesn't know that his tight end can't catch the ball, keep on his feet, and kind of run down and get a touchdown. But yeah, kind of those hits are quite common. Kind of as long as the head and neck area isn't impacted, it's kind of just seen as a fair game. But it was, I understand kind of watching it. It does look quite harsh, but it was perfectly legal, and kind of everyone just got up and carried on.
Again, it's many years later. The effects we felt. We have a question came in. Hold on, I'm just going to get it. So, us from our buddies down in Verona, of course, they're rugby people. There's actually the also of American football. I know they sponsor American football, the Ducks. Does Paul ask if the helmet goes off like rugby, will it be better? So if they don't wear helmets, would there be less injuries, or would it just be the same?
Yeah, with no helmets, undoubtedly it would be a slower sport. There is a feeling of kind of wearing a helmet, kind of, it's like when you're in your car, it's like you're safe. You can, if you wanted to go and kind of hit another car, you're safe. I mean, it's a bad analogy, but kind of that's how it feels. The shoulder pads, the helmet, it's rugby is a contact sport. Like there is a lot of hitting over and over again. Whereas American football is kind of like mini car crashes all the time. It's like you're 100 miles an hour, bang, take 30 seconds out and kind of go again. It's kind of, I can't play rugby. I am, it's just not my sport. I just can't, rugby's super physical, too physical for me. But American football is kind of just the one collision, right, and then there'll be another one in a minute's time somewhere else. Yeah.
I like that. I think I told the stories before where I quit playing rugby properly. I mean, I came back again to play snow rugby there a few weeks ago, but I quit playing rugby in 2014 simply because I was playing scrum half, and I'm East Land, but maybe like 5'7". I'm not about 65 kilos, 65 pounds. I wish 65 kilos. Sorry, I'm not that I wish 65 pounds. 65 kilos. And I was getting hit by the other scrum half, the other number 9, and he was substantially heavier. He's about he was about 5'10", 5'11".
What, even more than 65 pounds?
Yeah, he was a little more. He was around 80, 90 kilos. And when he was hitting me, I was like, ooh. And then I was still thinking, I could still make these tackles in rugby. I'm going in and someone breaks on the side of a scrum and I go after him. And then I realized that guy's 120 kilos and he's running over me. And so it's just a huge big differential. Start off, Andrew, straight away. I mean, Andrew, you watched the game. You suffered for it last week. You got up and work the next morning early.
Stayed up.
How was it for you?
I mean, it was an absolutely thrilling game. It absolutely was. But there were a couple of moments. Look, I'll get the negative stuff out of the way. And when I say negative, I did train for a term at university. Really not exactly professional level, but what Paul mentions about the technique of the hits, I remember being taught the exact angle, the very precise area you should. I was I can't remember, was I offensive lineman or defensive lineman? I was a lineman of some sort. I had to push somebody back. That's all I remember. But seeing those hits, what strikes me is the example you showed. There was another one. I forget who it was. It was one of the Eagles wide receivers he caught the ball And the one thing they focus on when they catch it, they just got to get those 2 feet down to make sure they get that first down. The hit comes in and they're completely unprotected physically for it, but they never seem to complain about it. They accept that is what they are there to do. And I couldn't help thinking throughout the entire game that the restraint, I mean, the acceptance of these hits, that's what you're buying into. You know what you're getting into. You're getting into these hits. It's I mean, the physical ability, but also I genuinely do think the restraint. How often do you see a complete free-for-all melee in American football? I don't remember ever seeing it. And when you think of the car crash impacts that Paul mentions, I'm amazed it doesn't happen more often. I mean, that's just the self-control. What a game! Absolutely. I mean, thrilling stuff. And again, like we said last week, like Paul picked out, he said, look, whichever quarterback does not get injured and performs well is going to win it for their side. Well, Mahomes just about managed to hobble to the end. Lo and behold, they pulled it back. What a comeback as well.
Isolt, I don't know if you watched the game on Sunday.
I got part of it, so we had big excitement with my brother arriving back with his new fiance. So that was on in the background, and as you can imagine, everyone else is talking about them, and I'm like, right, guys, if you can just all stand on that side of the room, we'll all admire the sparkle from there. But I need the TV on, so I got most of it. I think actually one of the things Paul said, it actually rung really, really true with me when he said about it felt like it was a very football focused Super Bowl. I think not only was there less hype around what the show and what the performance was, I think perhaps it felt like the first proper post-COVID Super Bowl. It felt like it was a huge event, but it was a very sport-focused event, which is normally there's so much more about the halftime show. And it begins to take over from the football. And I think I was actually more looking forward to the game, which is maybe that's my age that I'm like, I enjoyed the halftime show when it was all the 90s rappers who I still thought were like making a comeback and keeping of my vintage. But I thought it was a great end to a season which started with some very unfortunately difficult moments for football during the course of the year. We saw some very, very bad concussions. We saw some bad injuries. They started the evening with, was it the Buffalo Bills player who joined the field, and they kind of showing that he was okay after having the incident a few weeks previously. And it's kind of those sort of moments. It felt like it was very much a football community feel to it, if that makes sense. Everything felt more football focused, which is really, really good. But I also think for NFL, it's very important that they have events that are less about Super Bowl as a one-off event, that it was a sporting event, and that it was essentially the best team on the night won, but it could have been either side. And as you can imagine, with last year's Super Bowl, I was a bit more invested, but I didn't get sucked into the either team could win. I knew who was winning last year. I worked through my demons, but I think it was a really good event, and I think it's important for a sport. I know I would just like to echo what Paul and Andrew both said about technique being so important. Technique is also obviously extremely important to rugby, and rugby is more obviously my area that would be more passionate about. But I think there has to be a huge focus on technique. Is also the thing that's going to safeguard players' health, particularly concussion perspective. And I think there's a huge focus on at the moment on rugby and altering technique. And less so in NFL, they're not trying to change the technique so much as they're trying to ensure it's correctly implemented. In rugby, there is an active shift to a different technique, which is in and of itself bringing about huge issues for players because they're basically being asked to unlearn something that they have had from a fundamental stage. And I think perhaps that's the other element.
Well, just explain to viewers, what's the new technique they're trying to use?
Over the last number of years, one of the big focuses of the concussion protocols in rugby has to bring the tackler height down. So the idea being that even though when we logically think about it in our brains, we think that, God, it'd be worse if someone was lower, in the sense that if you're tackling someone and you're colliding with their knee or their hip, surely that's much more difficult or painful and potentially more concussive than colliding with someone's head or their shoulder. And while it may be less pain, or it may be more painful for you as the tackler, the idea is also trying to protect the player and the ball carrier. And the idea being that we're trying to reduce the incidents in rugby where two heads are colliding. So as a result, they've changed not only the technique in terms of asking and requesting that players must tackle lower, but they've changed sanctions in the game. So it's a continual effect, and they're now changing at different grades of rugby. They're implementing it to different degrees. So the idea being that by sanctioning behaviour that would otherwise injure players, if you're continually getting yellow cards or red cards for colliding with the head or the neck or that area that's above your shoulder, eventually, because of the sanctions, players' behaviours will change. So we saw with Owen Farrell, the English player, in recent Saracens, and it was actually in his capacity as a Saracens player that this happened. They actually sent him away to tackling school, which is not like Q school or any of, like, you know, the nice fun ones that they send players off to where they're not making the grade. No, this is where they teach a professional rugby player who is being paid huge amounts, and because he's with Saracens, huge amounts in questionable fashion at one point. He's been paid huge amounts, and they're sending him off in his capacity as a professional athlete to teach him how to tackle correctly, because he doesn't seem to get it.
One thing I was saying to Eastlands, and I noticed when Tim started 3 years ago, actually 3 years ago, started playing rugby, the correct tackle technique. Now, when I was first playing rugby, and even when I was first watching rugby, we always said cheek to cheek. So the cheek of your face to the cheek of the backside of the person. And you started training tackling on your knees, and so to get the fear out of it. And then I saw, and I said it to the coaches here, I was like, that's not healthy, because they're basically, the kids are standing up like Johnny Sexton and the person runs into them. Now, I was told, well, that's the technique to wrap the ball up. And I'm thinking, no, that's not, yeah, it works, but also you're getting a immediate collision. And if you're, and it was funny because when we played the snow rugby a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago now, the first two contacts I had with an opposition player, I stood up straight because I was like, I'd forgotten how to tackle. So I had to remember very, very quickly to get my head down, because I got a bloody lip the very first tackle I got with a guy who's like quite substantially bigger than me, came in with a nabble, cracked me in the face. But okay, we're going to move out of this. I'm going to speak now in just a moment. Isa's going to come back and have a solo run about boxing, and then we'll move on to some rugby as well. Of course, rugby is coming up next week. So back after this. But first, I do have to show something. No, I won't. I'll wait until the next one, because it'll catch one of us out. So just back in just a moment, and Isa will come back with her solo run on boxing.
So good evening. Alan is giving me a solo run to discuss boxing and a State of the Union style moment. So last night we had a fight from Nottingham, which had as its most famous son until last night, Carl Froch, in terms of boxing, where Mauricio Lara, a Mexican featherweight, took on the home favourite Lee Wood, and ultimately in the 7th round knocked Wood out with his corner, Ben Davison, throwing in the towel with 10 seconds to go, which has provoked a mixed response across the boxing public. So Mauricio Lara has now come in to win the WBA featherweight title. And what's interesting about Mauricio Lara is this is his 3rd fight with an English fighter. He initially was brought over, and a complete unknown in terms of the larger featherweight circle, to fight Josh Warrington, and had a surprise knockout win against Josh Warrington. He then subsequently came back to rematch Josh, and unfortunately due to an incident during the fight where a cut got particularly bad, the fight ultimately had to be called and stopped. So he came to Nottingham as the bookies' favourite, but still as a relative unknown, in the sense that his boxing talent would be viewed in one light, but it seems to be his hard-hitting nature that is his special sauce, for want of a better term. And in boxing, we should probably never mention anything being any sort of special sauce, especially if they're coming out of Mexico. But in winning the title last night, it has brought an end to Matchroom's British male champions. So they currently have none in their stable. And it's come at an interesting time as Matchroom have recently changed their subscription model. But in doing so, this has really shook up the British boxing division, and in particular the featherweight division, because what we also saw at the end of last night's fight was Lara's previous foe, Josh Warrington, who was ringside, presumably in the hope that he would be challenging Lee Wood at the end of the fight for a fight between the two of them being a huge battle of Britain. It may ultimately happen now, but there were allegations by Josh Warrington at the end of the fight that Lara had in fact spat on him from the ring, which obviously left a bitter taste in a lot of fans' mouths after the whole thing, and potentially also a bitter taste somewhere around Josh Warrington. But in discussing what happened last night, there is this discussion that we need to continue to have about brave corners or sensible corners. Lee Wood, obviously, the big talking point which came out of the fight was that Lee Wood's corner threw in the towel with 10 seconds to go. And that seemed to be the universal theme of complaint on Twitter, where people were saying there was 10 seconds, he could have made it back to the corner. He walked back to his corner after the towel had ultimately been thrown in. And if he was able to clear his head, surely the 10 seconds should have been given to him to essentially make it through them and come out again in the 8th round. And the difficulty with that argument is we cannot basically lambast trainers for being too brave for their fighter's own good and then determine that a trainer has acted too soon in throwing in a towel purely based on how long is left in the round, because that's not the trainer's job to determine if 10 seconds is long enough for a fighter to clear his head. They have to make that decision irrespective of how long is left on the clock. And in doing so, Ben Davison probably for the first time in a long time acquitted himself well, in my view, because he's protecting his fighter from what could have come next in a second concussive blow if one had followed. But we now start into the 3rd month of 2023 with Chantel Cameron now as DAZN's, by DAZN, Matchroom's, because they're effectively one and the same, only British champion. And it will be interesting to see where they go from here in the coming months. And it obviously puts an interesting spin on what may potentially happen with a Katie Taylor fight, because now more than ever, they need a big fight night, because their next fight night of any large note, I suppose, for the general non-boxing hardcore public will be AJ returning in Wembley to have what is essentially a non-event of a fight in April. And then they had hoped May would be their big event with Katie Taylor and Amanda Serrano. But if that's only coming out of the 3 Arena in Dublin, it's a very small crowd and it's a schedule that suddenly looks very quiet for them in the coming months.
I guess especially with the whole new pay subscription model and trying to raise money from that, I mean, it does look like they're struggling a little bit. But
it's the only good thing I would say about the subscription model. And when I initially saw it, I got into a bit of, I was like, you know, they could ask me to pay in a kidney. I'd be like, or give my liver. I'd be like, it doesn't matter. It's boxing. I will do it. I'm not
give
going
Nala?
to pay unreasonable.
Would you give Nala?
Oh, obviously. In
Simba?
a second.
Simba?
That'd be harder, but it would depend on the schedule. I wouldn't do it for a Frank Warren schedule. But in saying that, I would say that their subscription model, what they actually have done is they've changed it to alleviate the cancel anytime brigade. So if you're going to cancel anytime, your subscription has gone up to $19.99 per month, which is interesting because $19.99 is also what you would get to pay if next weekend you choose, and I will go on about it next weekend, to watch Tommy Fury and Jake Paul, who are essentially 2 novice boxers fighting out of Saudi Arabia. And that fight has also caused some controversy this week for 2 reasons. Mostly because fans of Tommy Fury are complaining that it coincides with Love Island's episode next Sunday night. And obviously he's famous for that, so it's a big issue. And something which I noticed in the last hour and a half, I happened to be online. I saw Tommy Fury had put up about arriving in Riyadh, and I clicked into his story because I knew his father, John Fury, would be there, and I thought John Fury in Saudi Arabia, that's something I want to see. I don't care. I just want to see it. He'll be offending someone somehow. So clicked into it. And on Instagram, you can do your countdown clock to various events. Tommy Fury has named his countdown clock to a fight in Saudi Arabia, Execution Day, which I think is, I don't even think it's the most disrespectful thing in the world. I think he is that stupid. My mind was blown by it.
Listen, he's fighting, at least the one thing with Tommy Fury, like he's in his brother's shadow, of course, as well. And Tyson, the more he eats, the bigger the shadow gets. But I would also say that he has fought crap boxers, but he's fought boxers, whereas this other halfwit, no, that's an insult to halfwits. This quarterwit hasn't fought anybody. He's fought like an American footballer and a couple of washed up MMA guys who basically were struggling to stand on their feet. This is like, it's a joke. Like, I mean, we spoke with this when the previous this sort of madness that was going on before. Is this where boxing's going to go? Because this seems very scary. Saudi, I have no problems with an event being in Saudi. I'm sorry, I've said it before. I worked in Saudi for 2 years. One place is as good as the next. I'm not going to be snobbish about it. But this is like a fella who got famous because he was taking videos of suicide victims. Fighting a traveller lad.
Yeah, I've gone full circle to an extent on this. I haven't changed my view on it. What I have found, though, is at least these are both licensed boxers who, whatever their level, it's effectively two novice boxers having a fight because they're both training to box. They're both licensed. Maybe it's because of what has come out in recent weeks that I've found this much more. I find this has almost been diluted. I find it offensive that it is a pay-per-view event. I find it offensive it is a main event. And I find the build-up and some of the things that are said highly offensive. What I find worse is the likes of the Misfits organization. So that's basically it's like, as you essentially put it there, it's like two celebrities fighting, and it's not white collar. They're trying to consider it boxing. And I think that's 100 times more dangerous and more offensive than two guys who are being licensed. So they're having to go through the steps to be licensed fighting. But I do worry that all the discussion about what new eyes will be brought to the sport by these guys fighting, these aren't people who are going to stay in it for the sport. They're going to come to look at whoever the YouTuber they like is, or whoever the basketballer who decides he now wants to box is. I'm more concerned about branding an entire organization or an entire events package like Misfits, where it's all non-licensed boxers having fight nights that are being televised with no regard for the fact that licensing actually does matter, because you have to go through the scans. You have to have, you have to obtain your license. It's like saying, I'd rather watch people, I'd much rather, if I'm going out to drive on the roads, if everyone around me has a driver's license, I'll be happier, rather than someone going, well, I feel I can drive, so I'm just going to head out. Like there's a level of security in knowing everyone on the road should have a driver's license, unless you're in Moscow.
And it doesn't work in Russia as well, where basically you get them in a packet of Smarties. But one issue that I always have with this was like white collar boxing. I think is great. That's where people come in to raise funds, for example, and they train. And it's an amateur level. It's very controlled. It's with head guards and so on. And it's I've taken part in it. And it is safe. I will say that, like, for amateur boxing, for example, in Ireland especially, and the UK, the medical testing that they do in order to get into fight is just it's non-existent. It's very, very weak compared to what I see, for example, in Russia, where you have to do it's a full day. I saw what Tim went through for rugby and what the boxers do from his same sports club. It's quite intense. Paul, for testing to go play in American football, is there an annual test? Are there annual medical tests to be able to be, not licensed, but to be allowed to play?
That's a good question. Not that I know of. I mean, whenever a player comes through the draft, they have to have a full day of medical. The different franchises will have their own doctors, and they'll look at the records of when they would come out of college. It's a bit different to football with deadline day, where everyone's like, oh, they're having a medical. It seems to be kind of if you can put your lid and helmet on, you're pretty much good to go.
Okay, no, that's fair enough. I mean, again, it's at the different levels, and as you said, this is professional pay-per-view. Andrew, Are you caught up in this whole celebrity wannabe boxer bits?
Well, I actually do have one thing I would counter. When you call them quarterweights, I'd actually argue the opposite. It's not them. It's the people who lap it up. It's the millions of YouTube viewers. The Pauls, Jake Paul, he is simply an opportunistic person. I don't blame him for making the most of the opportunity he's been given. And the only thing I would say is it should be made very clear this is not going to be part of any official organisation or a separate organisation that has all of the medical checks and has all the licensing, but is not for any official title. Because let's be honest, he doesn't care about titles. He cares about views. He cares about whatever purse he's going to get. And he will guarantee, from a business perspective, not a sporting one, I fully accept Esalt's grind there. I don't actually personally have a problem with it. I'm not going to watch it. I'm not going to watch that sort of stuff, but millions of people will. And to be honest, fair play to him for making the most out of it and exploiting idiots who will pour £20 in to a pay-per-view fight. I mean,
you just talked about Esalt just there.
I will not be
It looked like for a moment Andrew's picture froze, but then he's like, "Oh no, I just got
Andrew made a good point there about not getting ranking. Mauricio Suleiman, who's the head of the WBC, if Jake Paul wins, he's giving him a ranking.
No, I mean that's the moment I would have a major issue with it. It should be completely set because everybody knows it is not remotely serious level of boxing. It's all for show. But as long as you accept it is just an exhibition, but fully licensed and with all the right checks, the doping controls and medical checks, the lot of it, but you're going nowhere near serious boxing. Don't try and pretend it's serious boxing. Then I don't have a problem with it. The moment you give ranking points, no, that's when I'm out.
Look, let's be honest. Sport in general, life in general, sport in general, and boxing has always enjoyed freak shows. We had a Russian boxer who was too big for boxing, who ended up a world champion. It's always been the same, a freak show, and we know who I'm talking about, Nikolai Valuev. And even though he's a good boxer, he was a strong boxer, he had talent, but again, people paid in to see this like absolute giant freak just beat people up. And I mean, boxing's always been like that. You had Butterbean as well for the longest time, where he just this gigantic fat guy hitting people really hard. So we will, people enjoy it. It's the same with most sports as well. Like people tune in, for example, as you said about American football, when you see that hit, I did the other day when I saw the hit, I was like, ooh. And then the replay thought, oh, that's bad. And same in rugby, you see this massive hit driving a guy out of bounds, and you kind of go, yeah, and then you go, Jesus. Then you see him slow getting up because he's after smacking his head off the ground. Same with the knockout. That I only watched the knock at the end of that fight. He would hit the ground or hit the canvas, and his head hit the canvas as well. Superb corner work, because only in the slow-mo replay you actually saw his head slap it. You could hear it. But you were so caught up in a knockout because it was an exchange of punches. It was a lovely left hook. It was very, very good. Okay, we're going to go out to a quick break and come back and have a bit of a chat about Manchester United and who they kind of really want to run their club. Back after this. Story. This was, of course, earlier on this year when Jim Ratcliffe, he's scored knighted for his services to whatever he does, the owner of Ineos, who produce chemicals and so on, 4.2 billion they want to try and buy out Chelsea for. Of course, that was rejected out of hand. The next situation, of course, now he is looking to buy Manchester United, and there has been some pushback from some parts of the media. Can I start with you on this? From what we know of this guy, his business practices have been fairly suspect at times. in this absolutely brilliant. I mean, I can't say it's not a takedown piece, it was very, very good by Andy Dunn. And as he said, that this is a man who once threatened to shut down a Scottish petrochemicals plant. He's going to put out over 1,000 jobs at risk unless the trade union agreed to job cuts, a wage freeze, harsher redundancy terms, and a scrapping of a final salary pension scheme. That was one thing. He's very like a Mr. Robert Maxwell. You can Google that, folks. Keane, is this the kind of guy that Manchester United, the fans, are going to be singing for?
They probably will if the finances are the right way and things can improve, because as we've probably noticed, supporters and morality at the moment don't knit together. Not the whole lot. I'm sure a certain amount of all of the different clubs that have been taken over in recent years, there's a little bit of morality, but it's very, very difficult at the moment. I don't think, even though what you've said there is extremely difficult to hear, I don't think if he was to take the club over from the Glazers, I don't think the supporters would be too upset. I think they'd be just overly concerned with the football side of things.
So would you agree on that? Because I didn't see it, but in our private chat, you put it about the house of Maxwell and Maxwell, because immediately, as soon as I saw that, I had no time for the man whatsoever. He's been involved in so many dirty things. He's a good businessman, of course. He is a very good businessman. He gets some strange kind of investors, but I wouldn't want him next in your club.
To me, it's one of these things where, the way someone, and obviously his investing across sports has been quite prolific in terms of what he has done. Ineos are obviously synonymous with a number of sports, and more recently we've seen them cropping up on the rugby fields of the Southern Hemisphere, and obviously with cycling. But it's almost a case of, I want to own a football club. The one I want to own was probably Chelsea, because that's the one you went for first, or it was just the one that was for sale, because he's since said, I think, that he's a Man United fan. But it's a case of, you want to own a football club. Great. Ryan Reynolds bought one further down the league. Maybe start there and work up. Don't start with a team that are in disarray and that have that huge profile. But obviously, if you're that kind of person, it reminds me of the dynamic. The reason I said Maxwell, the dynamic between Robert Maxwell and Rupert Murdoch, where someone wants to get something and they don't care about the actual needs that club has. Man United fans will welcome anyone with open arms. I'd say Steve Ashley, if he was to rock up right now, they'd be like, come on in, Steve, we'll take you in. Welcome to Sports Direct.
Mike Ashley,
sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you might as well call him Steve, because they call him an awful lot worse up in Newcastle.
My mind is distracted with it, but it is. There is also the fear is, like, if United don't sell, if the Glazers stay involved and just decide to get some cash in elsewhere, what position? Like, United fans saying we're going to have demands of the new owners. No, you're not. No, you're not.
Well, I don't think anybody can ignore the headlines. And it's made a very, very interesting narrative already since Friday's soft deadline from the sellers, Reigns, who arranged the sale of Chelsea as well. Now, Jim Ratcliffe is selling himself as, I want to put the Manchester back into Manchester United. Now, the points that the guys raised a few months ago, last summer, go into far deeper detail than most papers have covered this time round. Jim Ratcliffe from the Manchester area, he's English, even though he doesn't live in England anymore. Now, that is going to appeal to most of them, simply because, we'll start with the Glazers before we come on to the rival Qatari bid. The Glazers are so wildly unpopular, partly because they simply do not care about the football. They've been taking dividends out at extortionate rates every single year until this year. There's a split even within the Glazer family themselves. They've not reinvested in the stadium. The stadium is in a dire state of disrepair. The roof is leaking in places. It's appalling. The training facilities, this is the biggest, arguably the biggest brand, the biggest club in the world, one of them at least. Training facilities falling down. What have the Glazers done for it? Very little. So to get an American out and get an Englishman in, just that alone will appeal to supporters. However, we're all focusing on the wrong detail at this point. It doesn't matter what appeals to the fans. It matters what appeals to the sellers. The Glazers want the most money they can possibly get. Now, already, Jim Ratcliffe's Ineos bid has said we are bidding for a majority stake, which is the Glazers stakeholding, which will give them a controlling interest in the club. But it's not the most amount of money the Glazers can get. The Qataris have endless, and by Qataris, we should be clear that it is not the Qatari state. It is an independent Sheikh Jassim, who just so happens to be a relative of a former prime minister of Qatar, but we'll brush over that point. The popularity stakes for the fans is a no-brainer. Jim Ratcliffe is who the fans want because he's making the right noises. However, at what point do we draw the line between what fans want and what actually is good for the club? The moral aspect of Qatar's name has been dragged through the mud, and some would say, from a country's point of view, absolutely rightly, the human rights issues are a huge, huge issue. However, Jim Ratcliffe's history is not squeaky clean either. So, well, when you say it's a moral decision, well, where do your morals stand? In essence, we could dig the dirt up on any owner at virtually any club and say, well, how can you defend their actions? So where do we stand? Well, we don't know how much the bids have been made yet stand for. The Glazers want about $8 billion. I don't think they're quite going to get that. But they will be up there with one of the biggest bids ever for ownership of a football club, if not the biggest. And I think we all know where the deeper pockets lie there. The Qatari bid is far stronger on that front. There is conflicting interests, we can say. We know Jim Ratcliffe and Ineos have stakes in football clubs in France, in Switzerland, cycling, sailing. And his pockets aren't living. Formula One, of course, absolutely. So there's two separate issues here for me. There's what would be better for Manchester United. Forget the moral issue. I think the Qatari bid, if we're being brutally honest, from a business perspective, would be better for the club. They want to invest because it is good for their image. It is sports washing. There's no point trying to skip around it. It is sports washing. The question is, how comfortable are you with sports washing if it does, for your club, benefit the outcome, the long-term sustainability? And there's no question for me that the Qatari bid would be more successful. However, it isn't the only issue. I would feel more comfortable with Jim Ratcliffe simply because the headlines would then be, now it's Abu Dhabi versus Qatar. And I don't want that. It would be a distraction.
I'll say this out straight, and seeing some of the commentary, for example, from one Daily Mail or Sunday Mail writer, this is a lot about, the sports washing is fine just depending on the colour of your skin and your religion. And this is very much going into it because Jim Ratcliffe, of course, he pulled up sticks and went down to Monaco. He's living there, so he can save, I think, $1 billion a year or more than $1 billion a year. Pounds in tax, and they've already, as Andrew rightly mentioned, they've gone after the Qatari guy. They haven't touched Ratcliffe, despite so many in sport. Basically, this is the same as you're running a children's home and inviting Jimmy Savile over. This is, I'm being very brutal, but this is what you're getting yourself into. You do not want this person next to your club. And it's nothing to do with money, because his money is as dirty as anybody else, but his practices and what he does. Yeah, fine, we've got the kafala.
What's the intention? It's what's the intention behind the bid that you have to ask. I think.
It's basically to move money through the club, and I can guarantee you, if he's in there within 5 years, Old Trafford's gone. So this is what he does. He has no compunction about it. He's not a Manchester United fan. He's never been a Manchester United fan. Trust me on that. Issa, do you want to come in about... sorry, I'll come back to you, but you said you'd happily wash if it was for Spurs.
In this, I do wash regularly. I feel the need to out because that seemed very out there. I was like, sports washing. Look, I'm the only person there going, don't let the Qataris invest in United, not because I don't want United to, get the investment. I just need the money to be free and available to come our way, because we're okay with it. Come wash. We have no compulsions down there. We're happy. We will take the money. I think the thing is, you made a very important point there, and we had this discussion so much around the World Cup, where it became a question of the fact that we are determining the level of oversight or the level of investigation we will do on what someone's intentions, motives, etc. in becoming an owner of a football club or investing money in football clubs or tournaments is. We look at their skin colour as the first port of call on how far does the Daily Mail want to dive into their motives. And I think that is a huge point, and it's very, very important. I think there is a willingness to overlook certain things, definitely. The reality is, we all know that, as Andrew rightly pointed out, if it comes down to a question of who will go to the highest level, the deeper pockets are the deeper pockets, and that's the reality of it. But I also think there's almost a level of, I'm not going to say ignorance, because ignorance is the wrong word, but it's that level of delusion, perhaps, about football fans, that they seem to think that when you're running a business, someone is going to go, oh, I'm selling my business, because that is what it is. Am I going to sell it to the person who's going to do the best thing for a business I will no longer have an interest in, because I am divesting myself of my business? Or am I going to go, well, you know what, I'm going to get less money, but it would be good for the football club that I have already spent the last decade stripping the assets out of. But hold on, now's my moment where I'm going to be like, no, guys, I want you to have the best possible.
Now I want to get the fans on side when I'm leaving. Exactly.
Paul,
it's just...
Paul, I've asked you on this, and we discussed this last week, in course, with Portsmouth. You guys had your dodgy owners. You had no, and I can't. Some of them weren't even dodgy, but just there were so many issues around the club. What's your take on this? Because you've been through the mill.
Yeah, I mean, we had some owners that weren't even real people. So be careful. Buyer beware. Listen, very similar to kind of Newcastle United. I think Manchester United fans will kind of want anybody whose surname isn't Glazer. Kind of in the end, I think Jim Ratcliffe's bid is probably, for multiple reasons, probably the more palatable for the Manchester United fans kind of living in Manchester. Apparently they have 1 billion fans worldwide, so I'm sure the majority of them won't care and would be happy for kind of the Qatari team to take over. What are my thoughts on it? Be careful what you wish for. Nobody knows the true motives kind of behind any of these the bids. Jim Ratcliffe, you don't become like a self-made billionaire without making a few enemies along the way. I'm sure all of his business practices, as we have heard kind of in the last 20 minutes, aren't all rainbow and sunshine. I think it's kind of between the devil and the deep blue sea, maybe.
That is it. I mean, Andrew, again, I brought up the issue of this institutional kind of like those Johnny foreigners, and that's coming to the fore. The anti American had come on the back of anti-Irish. When the part owners of the club fell out with the manager of the club at the time, suddenly there were banners up like Irish out and so on. I mean, while the captain was Roy Keane. So there is this mania, but it is like, be careful what you wish for, because Ratcliffe, the rat, he brings an awful lot of baggage with him, and again, within 5 years, the club's gone.
Well, it is a very, very good point to make, and a point that has not been made by most media that most of us will have read all weekend. The most negative thing I've read, reported by, I believe it was the BBC article, I saw Dan Roan mention, well, on the negative side, Jim Ratcliffe has been a proponent of fracking. That was about the worst thing I saw reported. And not everybody is entirely against fracking. I mean, look, that's an issue that is, it sounds awful, but look, what level of importance do we give each issue? If we moralise over every single part of every single person's character, we'll never get to the actual sport itself. I mean, look, I care about the future of my football club fairly obviously, like everybody does. And if I'm being brutally honest, the Qatari bid would be far healthier for our football club. And I'm not talking about the sort of the moral health, the image, which will be a distraction. This is why I did actually say earlier on, I probably would be more comfortable with the Jim Ratcliffe bid, simply because it might be slightly easier. But then, like Paul said, be careful what you wish for. Look, there's major negatives to both bidders winning. The sports washing angle is true. Of course it is true. There's no point trying to pretend otherwise. We saw the Qataris during the World Cup say, look, we need to make more of an impact beyond the World Cup in itself. If we do nothing more to expand beyond it, use it as a springboard, it's been a waste of time. I'm going around in circles here. I can talk myself in and out of which bid I prefer. Quite frankly, I'm just willing to see what happens if the Qataris win the bid, which I'm certain they will do. Look, the football club will be healthy. The name will be dragged through the mud a little, probably quite a lot. But look, this is the world we live in. I'm sorry, but it is. Look, okay, just one last little thing I will say. Find me a bidder or an owner who is perfectly morally clean and also has the best interests of the club. Doesn't exist.
Issa would have said Ryan Reynolds and the other guy, but I have questions about that as well. Look, again, I think that no matter what, United fans, and they are. Andrew, we mentioned this earlier on. We just saw start. I think on Friday, United are by far the biggest football club in the world. They are. They have the biggest brand. I mean, I'm communicating with people in India. They're like, I'm a lifelong United fan. They've been fans since the late 80s, early 90s, but that has been handed down to them, especially in areas where there's a lot of contact with British people. I can tell you down in Malta, for example, you have Manchester United and you have Liverpool. You have Juve and you have, I think it's AC Milan. But that's again Malta because of the contact with Italy and with England. But they are the clubs. You have a huge Man United fans club in Malta. The numbers in thousands, and they will literally be killing each other because I remember one guy was from our club, Floriana. Another guy was from Sliema, who's kind of our local rivals. At matches, they will be ready to go at each other, but then they go to the pub that they always, I forget what it's called in Malta, and they'll sit there drinking, watching United matches, hugging each other. So let's just put it like that. No matter what, United are still the biggest club in the world. They are going to sell everywhere, and it's huge for them. Paul, looking at this, we did bring up the racism element. Are we over-egging it? Is that there with the coverage of it as kind of like, oh, well, we'd rather some guy who's a tax exile in Monaco than some rich fella from America or especially from Qatar?
Well, I think it also depends kind of what publications you read and kind of what websites you get your news from. Listen, personally, Man United, I don't think Man United fans will care as long as the name isn't Glazer. They will take anybody who they think, rightly or wrongly, will invest money in their club. As Andrew says, kind of the stadium's in a bit of disrepair, and he'll put a few quid into Eric Ten Hag's transfer kitty. It's quite difficult as a Portsmouth fan. We would have, a few years ago. Well, I'll tell you probably ask some Pompey fans now, and I guarantee you, more than half would take anybody with a dubious background from any country if it meant that we would be in the Premier League in the next 5 years. I can guarantee most of our fan base would take that.
Same. We see the same. Liverpool are going through the same thing with the Fenway Sports Group. And I said it before, and I said with United as well. If ISIS rocked up in the morning and said, listen, we're going to put 10 billion into the club, but we're going to have executions at half time, you'd have fans sharpening the swords to go carry out the beheadings because we're going to get 10 billion, we're going to win. Now, I'm exaggerating, of course, but as I said, fans don't care. Isan, you did mention, in the chat that the team are performing extremely well at the moment. I mean, they're not distracted, and that goes down to the manager, of course.
It does, and I think it also reminded me of, not only did it remind me of it, but unfortunately, thanks for reminding me that it's the depths of winter when I see myself like a different human during the summer months when I'm actually getting vitamin D. Thanks for that video. Good times, as I'm like, I look sickly now. However, it did remind me that when we went through Chelsea's transition of owner and Todd coming in, there was also the drama with Tuchel. Everything felt like it was in disarray because they'd come from a situation where it was complete chaos. Obviously, with everything that had gone on at the end of the Abramovich era, and the sale, and everything was just so up in the air for Chelsea, and it felt like it translated onto the field very clearly, and what was going on in the back room in a director sense was also coming into what was going on in the back room in a managerial and coaching sense. Whereas Thomas Tuchel, it kind of feels a bit like he doesn't care what's happening. Like, he obviously does care because it's going to impact the budget, as Paul rightly put, into what's going into his kitty, into future spending. But it feels very much like this is his team. His focus is the team. The team are going to perform well. That not only is a good thing for United fans, but it makes them a much more attractive proposition because they're already the biggest club globally in terms of, like, Man United as a brand and an entity. But if they're also playing good football, change, it's even better. And I think it's a really good sign of Thomas Tuchel, of Ten Hag, that you're not seeing that show on the field. And it is a good measure of him. And I think that's important for fans to kind of also take the second here and go, okay, we're trying to get rid of the Glazers. Look at how other managers have performed with the Glazers in the background. And then look at this guy who, when they're trying to get them out, how he's still keeping that team ticking along. And it feels like Man United are in a transition period where they're going in the right direction on all fronts. And that's a little bit worrying and upsetting for the rest of us. So, take some time.
Let's put it this way: they're now third in the league. They're only 2 or 3 points off City in second, and 5 off Arsenal first. Spurs, of course, up beating West Ham today 2-0, or yesterday 2-0, and they're up at the fourth place
today. Congratulations!
Yeah, it's good. One thing as well with the Glazers, I mean, they remember it wasn't that long ago that United fans were singing the praises of Red Bull Ralph, and they were delighted to get Ralph Rangnick in. And, he picked Ten Hag. His people are still United, even though they got Rangnick out. His people are still United. Ten Hag is his client. So there's this madness that people are going, oh, it's good. I do think Ten Hag, I was not skeptical, but I had no really opinion on it, but I didn't think he had it in it to make it at that level. I will say, and Andrew, I'll play this just especially for you. This is the kind of person that I can guarantee if Ratcliffe comes in, this is who he's going to bring with him. Trust me on this. This is who he's going to bring with him. And it's an interesting little, how should we say, vignette. Just a minute and a bit, and then he still can run away and enjoy the rest of our evening and rub zinc on the dog's paws. But just one more, you'll enjoy this now for a moment. And this is someone who the Rat will bring with him. So just enjoy this moment.
All of the things to get to a level of performance about consistency of good practice, doing the basics, the fundamentals in sport, doing them brilliantly, and that's going to get you a long way there. And then there's a little bit on top, which are going to make the real difference between the high performance, if you like, and excellence. And it's a mixture of those. You can't do one without the other. But I like that, and I see that in when I look at Ineos and how Jim, admire the pioneering kind of spirit and the determination, and knows not an option. I think I'll learn a lot from that. But also, I'm also challenged by the fact that I think Jim's probably fitter than I am at the minute. And he rode around. You did the
age adjusted.
Did the Mallorca challenge at the weekend, which I did last year. Didn't manage to do it this year. So I think my challenge is going to be to stay as fit as I can and make sure I get my running shoes and cycling shoes on
you can't afford to keep up. By me.
To keep up, yeah.
We have a number of words which we use to try and describe Ineos, and 3 of those would be grit, rigor, which is my favourite word in business, because you're not successful in business by accident. You have to be rigorous and detailed in your work and your analysis, and humour. Because you're only on this planet once, you've got to enjoy it. And I think the 3 words apply to Dave and his organisation as well as it does to myself and Ineos. There has to be chemistry, otherwise, it's not going to work. So.
There has to be chemistry, or else it's not going to work.
chemistry going on in the background there, all right.
No, yeah, chemistry, great choice.
Now,
Wasn't it? Yeah.
again, I'll say that was, after the watershed. So, Dave Brailsford, he got away with what he wanted to do, and he was making sure to suck up to the new boss. Of course, Dave Brailsford, the man who, and again, I thought that he was doing a great job, even though I was being told by people involved in cycling, don't trust him, he's snake oil. He transformed British cycling from not ran, also cycled in Olympic Games and so on. They're always great pros, very good pros who did well at different levels from Britain, but not like, massive tour winners. Suddenly he transformed British cycling, then set up his own team, Team Sky. Of course, we know who looked after Sky, and then got into bed with Ineos when Sky pulled out after a litany of scandals involving British cycling and, of course, Team Sky, when they had people who were doping and they had doping doctors. Of course, we know the brilliant Dr. Freeman case where he, had lost one laptop, got another destroyed. Then he destroyed one with a screwdriver in case some, as he said, an Indian teenager would hack into his computer, even though he said it wasn't internet enabled.
Party's agent with what happened to his technology.
I know, and of course they had the whole thing that they would never use any needles, and then of course they were shown yesterday they used needles. They would never employ anyone who had been involved with doping. They employ people who are involved with doping because in cycling, to get to the top level, you need, as Dave Redford said, marginal gains. And again, he is correct. They said that they were getting better because they had nicer, softer pillows for their cyclists. I'm not joking about that they were taking bigger poops. If they had like a half a kilo poop, it wasn't enough. They needed to have 750 grams or one kilo poops in order to be performing better on the bike. Again, people lap this up. Andrew, Andrew, ultimately, there's now another bidder, of course, the Elliott Wealth Management Group. They're huge people who own AC Milan, so they're massive people from the States. Hand on heart, who would you prefer? Because of course Elon Musk is also tipped to be interested as well, but that's just, again, that's Elon. I don't think he has two farms to rub together to buy after Twitter. But who would you, hand on heart, want to come in? Of the three, of the Elliott Group, of Ratcliffe, or the Fake Shake?
I really honestly don't know. But if I really have to say one, I guess I would have to say the Qatar Group. I mean, look, there's already been plenty of links Manchester United have had with very dubious characters, as virtually all major clubs probably do. And I know that's a real awful thing to say. Well, everybody's doing it, so everybody's in bed with somebody dirty. Well, it is true. What I hope would happen if the Qatari bid wins is human rights get an even brighter focus, because this is what I said about the Qatar World Cup. That was what I hoped would happen. Incidentally, in the last 3 months, how much have any of us read about human rights issues in Qatar? Who is really bothering about it anymore? I mean, virtually nobody. So I don't hold up much hope that the spotlight would be shone on the issues that do need to be addressed. But okay, yeah, I guess I've changed my mind. I said earlier Jim Ratcliffe, but I realised that it could potentially ruin my football club. Now, am I caring more about my football club than morals? Possibly.
Listen, when it comes to sport, let's not kid ourselves. We want our teams to win, and if we went fully moral, for example, I would not want to watch the Tour de France anymore. I do watch it. I came back to watching a few years ago because I enjoy the spectacle. I worry about watching rugby because of the hits and the brain damage and the bodily damage and what they're taking to get them out in the field and so on. But I still watch because I enjoy it. Paul, same with NFL. We said, like, you know the risks and you have to take them. So I'm going to end up with you, but Paul, sorry, that's really bad. I'm going to end up with you. Brian, have a word to say about that. Paul, sorry, it's late at night. Paul, for you on this, who would you see as being best for United of the three main bidders, the massively wealthy Elliott Group, the Qataris, or Mr. Ratcliffe?
That's a toughie, isn't it? I think that best for Manchester United would probably be the Qatari group. They have I think they have the deepest pockets. They will want to, like Manchester City, they won't be running the business for a business. They'll be running the club to win. It's a peacock showing its feathers. They want the more trophies, the biggest, the best, everything. So I think from a Manchester United point of view, fan point of view, it will be the Qatari bid.
You don't like watching Brailsford, and a lot of the people who had guests on the show who were involved with like Uli or so many people just detest him. You don't like him. Why? And who do you think is best for United?
Why do I not like him? I think he's a despicable human being. I think that summarises it just about. And I think marginal gains is absolute marginal crap. But we won't work through my issues with Sir Dave and the other illustrious Knights of the Realm who join him as part of the former Team Sky efforts. But what I will say is I think the Qatari bid, there's two reasons I think the Qatari bid will be the best for the club, not just the finances. When you mentioned and when you reminded me of Dave and Ineos, because I tried to blank Dave out of my thought process, I refused to call him by his title. Not only, you can say about the moral side of Qatar, that's to do with the morals of, your moral aspect is to do with the country. It's a cultural view that we hold from the Western world, but the morals of Ineos are a different type of morals that will directly impact the players and how they result in their performance, as opposed to the morals of the background of where the money comes from. It's a concern that actually makes me think the Qataris are better on a number of levels for Man United. And as Andrew said, if it makes us have that discussion again that we had for all of 5 minutes about the Saudis taking Newcastle, that we had for all of the 4 weeks of looking at the World Cup, if it brings it to the fore again, that we used to have, and I'm going to say it now, that we used to have about boxing going to Saudi Arabia, that we've now forgotten the moral aspect that we were all so hyped up about, because that's the reality. Sports washing works. The difference with Ineos is the fracking they do, obviously on a environmentally unfriendly basis, is similar to what they do to the teams and sports people they become involved with. It is, what they do is unhealthy, it's not good for the image of any sport, and it has longer term effects on a club than getting money in from somewhere like Qatar will have in terms of the negative impact. That's my view. And we would also like some of that Qatari money. Any other sheiks out there who are like, oh, I might want to spend some money, come on down. We're willing to take you. Sorry, just.
Okay,
I would be that person who would be like, oh, ISIS are turning up at the door. Guys, hold on. I have to get my burqa. I am ready for the match. It's got a Spurs logo on the back. We're all cool. I will take your money, and I have no moral high ground, because I think we are so now, after listening to so much of what we talked about around the World Cup, we're on our moral high horse deciding what is good and bad morality. One thing I can tell you for sure is what Ineos do is bad morality for sports players who want to compete fairly.
But always, you mentioned as well, I don't think it was in the clip we showed earlier on, it's in the description of this show. You can click on a clip for a longer kind of like view of it, and also the interview with Brailsford and with Ratcliffe. Easton mentioned, I mean, Rangers have gotten in, of course, to the Southern Hemisphere, to New Zealand rugby, and we see what's going on with them as well. They're in an awful lot of places, and business practice, they make money, they do well. As I mentioned in the clip, that they do have investors that are strange coming into the company, but still they do their business. But again, for the sport, I worry, and I do again settle along. I have great time for United. I remember going to United they weren't playing at all. They weren't playing. It was a Saturday with no match day, and the place was full of tourists from all around the world buying merchandise, taking pictures, in love with the place. That's what Manchester United is. It's an institution. Hated, yes, because they were extremely successful for many, many years. Pity it, yeah, because as with every other club, they have peaks and troughs, but at the same time, as a brand, they are second to none. In soccer for sure. Very quick. Next week, of course, we'll be looking back at the rugby. Of course, Italy looking to derail Ireland's chariot. Wales looking to try and restart their Six Nations and beat England, and of course France against Scotland in a potential Grand Slam decider on Sunday. So we're going to see what's going to happen with that. So I will just say thank you very much, Andrew Flunt. I'm sorry that we all picked on you and sort of changed your mind or presented a different case to you. So my apologies on that.
No, it sums up the issue, doesn't it? It is very, very hard to be very clear cut, and it isn't clear cut. But I enjoyed it, and I think people could do well with listening to our discussion, because they won't hear much of that as balanced, I think, in the media. So we've done a service to the public. As
Paul said, that it depends on the media you read and the media you watch, and it does make a big difference. Paul, thank you again for being on us this week. Terrific as always, and well done on influencing the result of the Super Bowl last week by picking the wrong team.
Well, I'll be happy to do it next year as well, so don't you worry.
Isa, Cody, thank you so much. I know we kept you on 18 minutes longer than we should have. Thank you so much, and have a terrific evening.
Keep Par checking in and just checking right back out now for the evening.
Very good. Go enjoy your burqa.
Thank you.
Okay, folks, so we will go out into the good night and say thank you very much for joining us this evening. We had quite a lot of viewers messaging. I did get a chance to put the messages across, but of course, thank you very much to our people all around the world actually tuned in this evening, and really appreciate it. Again, the discussion we have was open. We presented facts. Yes, we presented our own opinions, our own views. However, money will out at the end of the day. So until next week, take care of yourselves and each other.
Da 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 da. It's the motherfucking DOW.